Before we move over to the debate, I promised you a third presentation. And for this presentation, we are going to try to make connection with Edinburgh, with Jonathan Cowie, doctor at Napier University. Hello, Jonathan, can you hear us?
Yes, fairly, I can hear loud and clear.
Okay.
Can you hear me all right?
Excuse me?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you okay, loud and clear. We can see you on the screen, so I have nothing more to say than just leave the floor to you for your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, many thanks, Fairly. Just to welcome everyone. The title is slightly different than was than was put on the program, but it is the same topic, and there is an interactive part to this as well. What we're going to look at are really sustainable logistics, learning through a trial and error, and finding through doing so a small key to a successful business model. A quick word first. I really would much rather be there in person to actually present this, but unfortunately, obviously with the way things are, that was not possible. But I do hope that you are enjoying the conference and find it of interest and of value as well. And hopefully this part won't be too painful. In terms of what we're going to look at, an introduction, just some background issues to the topic. You've heard a lot already from Fairley and Shelka. I'll be referring to some of that, but only very briefly. Methodology, literature review, the case studies, and summary and conclusions. Hopefully there's not going to be any repetition here, however. But in terms of background, as you've heard, certainly one common proposed solution to urban freight transport issues is the idea of a consolidation centre, the last mile, what is known as the last mile. And our mission on Surflogh was to identify viable business models from running 5 pilots, of which you've heard about 2 already. Such initiatives, however, do have a horrendous commercial record. Looking at the past record of these things, very few, if any, actually survive beyond the initial phase. I've put there a very rough guess success rate at no more than 3%, and that's an extremely optimistic measure, somewhere between 0 and 3. And hence, in terms of our mission on Surflogh, does that mean that our mission was therefore impossible? And hence, do we choose to take it? Well, this session is entitled Trial and Error. And I think certainly we can take it if we're willing to accept and learn from trial and error. And I will come back to this towards the end as well. And again, just in terms of background issues, again, you'll be aware a lot of these. Freight transport is good for the economy, bad for the environment. There's the Galbraith argument, which has come up in a few of the presentations already about at some point society's primary concern to switch from the sole creation of wealth to goals focused on improving the quality of life. That was said back in 1958, and maybe finally we're starting to get there, children playing in the street and things like that. And hence, the ultimate focus should be on the pursuit of goals consistent with meeting wider social and environmental aspirations. It's consistent, this will come up again, consistent with the idea of the triple bottom line. And in this context, as I said, the creation of enhanced public spaces is not just traffic spaces, it's spaces for people. And we were saying this on Surflogh even before COVID. I think these things have come far more into focus now with COVID. In terms of the approach taken, how do we identify successful business models? In other words, it's hard to describe a qualitative combination of desktop research, action research, and grounded theory as well. And I won't go through these slides point by point. Just the first stage was to undertake an applied literature review, which identified key themes and potential gaps to then maybe apply to the actual case, to the actual pilots which we ran. And then the case studies which we developed coming out of these were over time through site visits, obviously pre-COVID, informal discussions and formal online interviews latterly, obviously under the times which we have been living. In terms of the literature review, I'll try and briefly cover this. What came out of that, essentially, we formally reviewed over 60 research papers. There are hundreds in this area. I won't go into why, but certainly by the time we reached 60, we're weren't really learning anything new. It was just same things which were coming up, and hence that was considered to be sufficient. Being critical of the literature in this area was a critical literature review, which we undertook. So despite the relatively large research base, if you're looking at this critically, there's been a real lack of development of the subject. A lot of what is repeated came up in a key paper produced by Mike Brown and colleagues at Westminster back in 2005. So hence, there's a feeling that when you look at it, it hasn't really moved on. It's the same thing, and I think this is related to trial and error, and I will come back to that. Despite that, there's good research in this area. High validity, reliability is supported by primary data, clearly delimited. It's not making grand sweeping statements. And that did allow identification of key issues and then apply these through to the actual case studies. Some of these you've heard before. These were the main themes: identified a critical mass, supply side economics, and then in terms of identifying successful business operations, the key components: top down versus bottom up, Elkington's triple bottom line, partnership working, and importance of key individuals. And then from that, identify business models. I will go through the first one first because that is fairly said already. There are lots of other issues, but certainly this idea of a critical mass is key. And in this area, there's the Brown 2005, we've not moved on either, 2005 paper, did stress the actual difficulties of consolidation centres creating a critical mass, getting enough consumers. And that's actually compounded in this area. And again, this has come up in the discussions in this session already through sectorization. It's not, freight isn't just freight. There's different types of freight and there are different channels. And it's what's known as centralized and decentralized. And this is mainly working in the area of decentralized channels. And hence, well, certainly from some Dutch research, the size of that whole market, in terms of the whole market, is only around 25%. Centralized is 75%. So you have problems with the total market size, and then even when you split it down further, you have further problems. And that leads to the paradox of the last mile, what we've identified as the paradox of last mile consolidation, the elements of the retail sector that could benefit from the use of last mile consolidation, which is decentralized by its very nature, tends to be a small proportion of the whole market, hence insufficient to create a critical mass. And therefore, hopefully this will come up on the screen, we kind of get into that kind of territory. It's not quite a straight chicken and egg problem, but we're certainly getting into, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. So, moving on, what's of supply side economics? I'll just very briefly highlight this. Road freight is a highly competitive industry, therefore highly efficient. If you're not efficient, you don't make any money. And therefore, if there's money to be made in UCCs, it would have been done so already. And you're trying to post something on something which is a highly efficient market anyway. And that's a real problem. That is a real problem. This is now the interactive part. Our pilots, hopefully this will work. No hands. Oops. There are no hands. I'm not also going into these. You've heard quite a lot of detail about two of them. I'm just highlighting what 5 pilots, and I've broadly consolidated them. And what I'm going to speak about in the last kind of 5 minutes or so is drawing from across all those 5. I guess the 3 I should highlight. Drenthe was a consolidation hub to the south of Groningen. Boras was a micro hub, a sub hub for DHL, and finally Edinburgh was a micro hub and cycle logistics. So just to fill in on the 3 which you've not heard about or briefly already. So in terms of trying to make a commercial operation out of this, in terms of our work, what have we identified as being critical? And this is both in terms of critical for success, but also critical in why it may have not been quite so successful. The first one is key, Elkington's triple bottom line. That has been considered briefly in this research before, but certainly significantly under-researched, this whole area about maximising across economic goals, social goals, and environmental goals. And that certainly of all of these providers which have been involved in the pilots, that's been a common theme. So these are just examples. I'm not going to go through these point by point because I'm aware of the time. So these are examples. They tend to be socially orientated. And again, that's across the pilots. It's not just on one. And certainly within the Edinburgh example, I guess the one that I do point out in terms of operation of the cargo bikes, excellent safety record because of training. Very few accidents. In the 6 years, the only damage to bikes were due to parking accidents, not actually in operation. And when we reflect upon that, I guess it's very difficult to see how such a business could operate really any other way. And these are things you've heard about already from Schalke and Fairley. One we did identify, this has not been identified in the academic literature, bottom up versus top down. If we look at past UCC initiatives, they've generally been imposed from the top downwards. Local authorities responded, or like ourselves, I mean, let's put our hands up here, like ourselves in Surflogh, through EU projects, and hence have been implemented from the top down. But what we have found across a number of pilots, and again, reasons for success and maybe reasons for failure, is that what is really required is coming from the bottom up. We've already highlighted there's a highly efficient freight distribution system in there. If you try and replace it with something else, that's bound for failure. If you try and integrate into it and try and identify gaps in it, then that's where you're likely to get some success. And that's been true, certain, most definitely in two of the, I'm not going to name names here, but in two of the pilots, one of which you've heard about already. And hence from that, you build that over time. And then there's Ari's question I'll come on to about, well, that then almost develops into partnership working, how you build that further. But I guess the first point I want to highlight is tied into the business structure. All of these enterprises are very much owner-controlled, small, medium enterprises, and hence the importance of key individuals. Again, Schalke was talking about Peter, I think, at Go Fast. He's dedicated. We have the same kind of individual in Edinburgh, who very much believes in that concept and is part of a business that believes in that concept. So they're not just driven by economy, they're driven by other factors as well. But on the other side, that can lead to problems. That can lead to failure if you have a dependence on key individuals. I've said that's life. Life can distract you, and hence things can start going wrong. That's just part of life. Partnership working, in terms of building the business, this again has come up in conversation, is linking into existing partners and identifying gaps. And this came up in the first one. One of the key advantages of cycle logistics is in accessibility. Very fascinating piece of research by Alan and others, 2017. I guess the one I highlight of the total distance, this was with a courier, of the total distance driven was 11.9 kilometers. The driver walked 7.94. 40% of the distance driven, and the vehicle was parked for most of the time. Well, once you get into cycle logistics, you have far better accessibility. And I don't know if I say this later, but I'll say it now, especially for small issues, small items, which are extremely problematic in this case. You have to stop just to deliver a small item. Well, with the cycle logistics, there's that can be done a lot better. It's not a total solution, as I've highlighted there. It still leaves a problem of building access. You get stuck in buildings, and hence that can still be a problem. So these are the critical factors which we've identified. In terms of potential future developments, the first mile, I'm going to go into this. This is highly problematic for courier services, very disruptive, because they're done on the, if I use the word on the hoof, is that going to translate? They're ad hoc, they're not planned, they arise, bang, and hence can disrupt services. And there is a real potential there for certainly cycle logistics to play a major part in that. Localization. This is the idea of the butchers, or the old idea of butchers, grocers, bike. We have many high-end produce, local produce, and actually linking these things up. That's fitting with our Elkington's triple bottom line. So therefore working in that. And also part of it, I did just highlight this one. We don't have any proof of this. Maybe this is just a feeling that we're getting, is that going forward, there is more intervention will be required, I think, especially with the times that we'll live through, and more intervention by public authorities, maybe moving towards the idea of city logistics, more public management of the whole process, and hence there may be opportunities there. In terms of conclusions, just to briefly conclude, research in the area of last mile consolidation, in quality if you're being critical about it, which we need to be. And maybe one is that the topic has not actually evolved or developed over since 2005. A lot is simply repeating what's gone before. Could be argued, and this is where trial and error comes into it, that what we've seen up to now is trial and success. If you're given money for an EU project, you must succeed. Yes, or be seen to succeed. And maybe that could lead to overlooking some of the harsh realities. And hence what you come up with is something which is fairly superficial. Whereas if you take more approach, trial and error, then as long as you're willing, as I said at the start, to learn from error, and that's something that's been very strong on the Surflogh project. And are we proud of it? I can't see my project partners there. But as long as you're willing to learn from it, then I think we have identified some real issues and potential for the future. This successful business model, identifying Surflogh, is built around Elkington's triple bottom line, inevitably is owner controlled, built from the bottom up, and complementarily you're linking into the existing system, and you're working with partners, and you're doing what you're best at, and allowing them to do what they're best at. But therein lies the challenge in that, this was Arian's question, how can such a business model be scaled up without losing the very essence of what it is? And I guess that's where we are now, and that's what we're starting to see, how that can be overcome. And maybe with policy and structural change, maybe there lies some of the answers. So thanks for your attention. That's all I have to say. And if it's possible, I'm more than willing to take any questions, or if there's no time, I quite understand that as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, we're a bit limited in time, but I propose that we take 2 questions.
Okay.
So are there any questions from the audience here? Just one moment, I'll come up and give you the mic.
Thank you. Great presentation. My name is Sven, University of Ghent, and I have a question related to the critical element of critical mass in city distribution. I totally agree that this is the missing link. In your literature study or in your case studies, have you ever encountered an example whereby the city itself, through its administration or procurement department, put its own inbound volumes into the city hub to add to that critical mass, or is that still something which is to be explored?
That's a very good question. And there has been limited, but not fully exploited, very limited. There are some small examples, small key, but I don't know if people in the room will understand this. One of the barriers with that has been the structure of public administration. It's been very difficult to across the board, force various departments to actually use such services. Is this one of control? I don't know. It's hard not being in the room. I can't get a feel for what's in the room if people are kind of have experienced this themselves, as in just the structure of public. I would say the structure of public administration has not really allowed that to be fully exploited, I think.
So that would be worthwhile to explore or to test further.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes, it is. I would say it's been considerably underused, but where it has been attempted to be used, it has run into problems with the structure of public administration, and you can't force people. And again, as we're all aware, those of us in the public sector, budgets are always tight, and it is an underexploited area, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much. Very useful to know.
Good question. Good question.
Another second, last question? Or can we wrap up? Or Arjen, you have something from the online public?
All die for coffee, aren't you?
I just don't want to take up too much time of the debate. So
No.
A last question, Arjen.
Hi, Jonathan.
Hello.
Question online about cultural aspect. Public authorities, local governments perhaps find it difficult to fund projects that are not successful. Should there be some change in the way these local governments look at these projects, that they accept failure, to investigate what works and what doesn't? Is that something that can be linked to our findings as well?
Absolutely. And I think, I mean, we're not kind of pretending things here, because I think what that links into is also trial and error, and be willing to accept trial and, not trial and error. Trial and error, yes. To be willing to try things, because I guess, I mean, this sounds obvious. If you don't try things, then nothing's ever going to happen, and you won't actually get anywhere. And I mean, I don't want to be too critical of the research in this area, because I don't want to sound like I don't know. But I think there has been that issue as a highlight about, yes, we'll trial and success. But that hasn't led to anything. It's been kind of superficial, and I think unless you're willing to accept that not everything you try is going to succeed, then you're not really going to get anywhere. Or very slowly.
Thanks.
Okay. A final thank you, Jonathan. Stay with us if you want in the Teams link.
Yes, I will do.
But
yes.
We're going to take you off the big screen now.
Thankfully.
This rounds up our presentation part of this session. And now I want to go further with the debate part. We want to conclude this session and this day with a good discussion on what do we think about all this, and this trial and error and new business models, and what is the future of logistics, and how do some experts think about it? So I want to invite Bart Dumoulin, our moderator for this debate, to the floor, and our 3 debate participants. And I think, Bart, you will present them and introduce them, or? Oh, okay. So take the floor. Take a seat. I'm going to give you something to drink.
Oh, something to drink.